I still remember the sound of laughter echoing across that dining room, the smell of roasted turkey, the golden light of the candles, the chatter of relatives I hadn't seen in months. Everything felt warm, except the way my father looked at me. He was sitting at the head of the table, glass of wine in hand, his eyes locked on me with that same disappointed glare I'd known all my life. And then, out of nowhere, he said it. "So tell me, son, how's that little company of yours doing?" "Still broke." A few people laughed quietly. My aunt looked down at her plate, pretending not to hear. My brother, the golden child, smirked as if he'd been waiting for this moment. I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't say a word. I'd learned long ago that arguing with my father was like shouting at a storm. It only made more noise. He took another sip of wine and added, "You're 34, and you still think you're the next Steve Jobs? Maybe it's time to grow up and get a real job I could feel every eye on me, waiting for me to react." But I didn't. I just smiled politely, even though inside, I wanted to disappear. My mother tried to change the subject, asking about the cranberry sauce, but the damage was done. My father leaned back in his chair, laughing, his words slicing deeper than he could ever imagine. "Don't worry," he said. "Some people just aren't meant for success." That was Thanksgiving Day, a holiday meant for gratitude. But that night, all I felt was humiliation. I remember the reflection of the dining room chandelier shimmering in my glass of water, distorted like my sense of worth. I excused myself from the table quietly, saying I needed some air. No one stopped me. I walked out to the porch, the cold November wind biting against my face. For a long time, I just stood there, listening to the muffled laughter inside. And that's when I made myself a silent promise. One day, he'll know exactly who he was laughing at. My name is Ryan Carter, and that Thanksgiving dinner changed everything. I'd always been the disappointment, the one who never followed the rules. My father, Mark Carter, was a retired banker, old school to the core. He believed in stability, security, and status. To him, life was a formula. Work hard, save money, retire quietly. And I believed in dreams, in taking risks, in building something from nothing. That was our war, a quiet, lifelong battle between two definitions of success. I started my company, Blue Orbit, 3 years earlier, a small tech startup developing AI-powered analytics for small businesses. My father never believed in it. "Apps don't make money. People do," he'd say every time I mentioned my progress. What he didn't see were the nights I spent coding until sunrise, the loans I took, or the sacrifices I made just to keep the dream alive. I sold my car. I slept in my office. I lost friends who thought I was crazy. But I never lost that fire, that tiny voice that whispered, "You're meant for more." That night, after walking away from that table, I sat alone in my car outside my parents' house. My phone buzzed with a notification from one of my developers. "We fixed the final problem in the system. The platform's ready." For a moment, I smiled. My father's laughter still echoed in my head, but so did something else. The voice of every person who had ever doubted me. I whispered to myself, "You should never laugh at someone still trying." It became my mantra. When I drove home that night, the city lights of Seattle looked different. Every red light, every reflection on the windshield felt like a reminder. I had something to prove, not to the world, not even to my father, but to myself. The following morning, I woke up before dawn, opened my laptop, and sent a final proposal to a potential investor who had been ignoring my emails for months. I had nothing left to lose, but for the first time, I felt unstoppable. Little did I know, just 3 weeks later, my entire life would change, and the man who once called me a failure would be the one standing speechless in front of me. The days after Thanksgiving were quiet. I didn't go back to my parents' house. I didn't answer their calls either. Deep down, I wasn't angry. I was hurt. Because no matter how old you get, being laughed at by your own father stays with you. It echoes. It becomes a sound that plays in the back of your mind when you're alone. But instead of letting it break me, I decided to use it as fuel. Every morning, I woke up before the sun. My apartment was small, just one room, a cheap couch, and a desk covered with notes and coffee stains. Most people would have called it a mess, but to me, it was my battlefield. That's where I built everything. My computer sat on the corner of the desk, the screen filled with numbers and ideas that only made sense to me. Sometimes I'd fall asleep while working, my head resting on the keyboard. And when I woke up, I'd start again. Money was always tight. I remember opening the fridge and seeing nothing but a half-empty milk carton and a jar of peanut butter. Some nights I'd skip dinner just to stretch my savings a little further. But every small victory, every time I made a little progress, felt like a feast. I wasn't chasing riches. I was chasing freedom. The freedom to prove that I could build something real, even if nobody believed in me. There were times I wanted to quit, days when everything seemed pointless. I'd look out the window and see people walking their dogs, laughing, living normal lives, while I sat inside, fighting a dream that didn't seem to move. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered that night at the dinner table. The laughter, the words, the shame. And I'd whisper to myself again, "You should never laugh at someone still trying." One day, things got worse. I received an email saying one of my biggest partners was pulling out. They said the idea was too small, that it would never work. I remember staring at that message for a long time, my chest heavy. For a few minutes, I just sat there in silence. Then I laughed to myself, not because it was funny, but because I had nothing left to lose. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. "Fine," I said. "If no one believes in this, I'll do it alone." And I did. For weeks, I worked non-stop. I fixed things that broke. I improved what I had. I talked to people online who had similar struggles. Slowly, something started to happen. Small businesses began showing interest in what I was building. A few even signed up to test it. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. Hope came back piece by piece like light entering a dark room. Then, one Friday evening, when I was too tired to even stand, I got an email. The subject line read, "We'd like to talk." It was from a large company that had heard about what I was doing. They wanted to meet. I didn't believe it at first. I must have read that email 10 times, thinking it was a scam. But it wasn't. The next week, I sat across from people in suits, trying to hide how nervous I was. I didn't have fancy words or a team of professionals, just an idea that came from years of being told I couldn't make it. They listened. They asked questions. And by the end of that meeting, one of them smiled and said, "We think you've built something special." I'll never forget that moment. For the first time in years, I felt seen. They told me they wanted to buy my company, and the amount they offered almost made me stop breathing. It was more than I'd ever imagined. I walked out of that building in disbelief, the cold air hitting my face like a wave. I wanted to cry, scream, laugh, all at once. But instead, I just stood there and whispered, "Dad, you have no idea." That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy anything. I just sat in silence, staring at my small apartment. The same place that had witnessed every sleepless night, every doubt, every tear. And I smiled. Because at that moment, I realized something. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The morning after signing the deal felt unreal. For years, I had woken up with worries, bills, broken dreams, people leaving. But that day was different. The sun looked brighter, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The company I had built in a tiny apartment, with nothing but hope and stubbornness, was now worth millions. And yet, what surprised me most wasn't the money. It was how quiet my heart felt. No celebration, no pride, just calm. When I looked around my apartment, I saw the same cracked walls, the same old desk, and that same coffee cup I'd used for years. But they all looked different now. They weren't reminders of struggle anymore. They were symbols of survival. I sat on the couch and smiled, thinking about how the world hadn't changed. But I had. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't need anyone's approval, not even my father's. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if he had heard the news. It was everywhere. Articles online, interviews, even a short piece on television about a local man whose dream became a reality. I imagined him sitting in his favorite chair, reading the newspaper like he did every morning. I could almost see his expression change when he reached my name. Maybe he dropped the cup. Maybe he just froze. Or maybe he pretended not to care. I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to call him. Instead, I focused on building the next chapter of my life. I moved into a new apartment, still modest, but filled with light. I helped the small businesses that had supported me when no one else did. I hired people who believed in what I was doing. Every decision I made came from gratitude, not revenge. And somehow, that made everything feel right. Weeks passed, and life started to feel normal again. The days were full, but peaceful. I spent time walking by the water in the evenings, thinking about how strange life can be, how quickly things can change when you don't give up. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling for no reason, remembering those long nights when I thought I was wasting my life. Now, all that pain felt like part of something bigger, like it had to happen exactly that way. Then, one afternoon, while sitting in a cafe, I got a call from an old family friend. He said, "Ryan, your dad's been talking about you lately. He heard what happened." I paused, unsure what to say. The friend laughed softly. He didn't say much, just that he was proud. I didn't know how to feel. Proud? That word had never been used in the same sentence as my name before. It didn't make me angry. It made me curious. Maybe he had changed. Or maybe, just maybe, success had finally spoken louder than my silence. But deep down, I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I didn't want to stand over him and prove I was better. I wanted him to understand that I never needed to be compared in the first place. The person I had become was stronger because of the pain he caused, and that truth meant more than any apology could. One evening, as December turned to January, I received an invitation to the family's New Year dinner. My first thought was to ignore it, but something inside me whispered that maybe it was time. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for closure. I looked out my window, the city lights shining below, and thought, maybe I'll go. Maybe it's time he sees who I've become. That night, before going to bed, I looked at the old family photo sitting on my bookshelf. My father's hand was on my shoulder, and even in the picture, I could see the distance in his eyes. But for the first time, I didn't feel hurt looking at it. I just smiled softly and whispered, "You'll see soon, Dad. You'll finally see." The night of the dinner arrived sooner than I expected. As I parked in front of my parents' house, memories flooded back. The cold wind, the laughter, the words that once broke me. But this time, the air felt different. I wasn't the same man who had walked out months ago, hurt and humiliated. I was calm, certain, and strangely grateful. I took a deep breath, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the door. When I stepped inside, the house smelled the same: roasted turkey, cinnamon, the faint sound of music in the background. But the silence that followed my entrance was new. Every head turned. My mother smiled, hesitant but warm. My father looked up from his chair, his eyes widening for a moment before settling back into that familiar, guarded expression. "Ryan," he said slowly, "didn't think you'd come." I smiled. "Neither did I said softly, placing my coat on the rack. The room was filled with the same faces as before, but no one dared speak. I took my seat quietly, across from him, and for a few minutes, all you could hear were the sounds of silverware against plates. Then my brother cleared his throat. "So, we all saw the news," he said awkwardly. "Congratulations, man." I nodded politely, thanking him. My father kept his eyes down, his hands tightening around his glass. When the table started to talk again, the tension eased. For everyone but us, my father finally looked up. His voice was quieter this time. "You really did it," he said. "You sold your company." I nodded again. "Yes, Dad. I did." He leaned back, eyes searching my face. "I didn't think you had it in you." I could tell he wanted to sound proud, but the words came out heavy with regret. I smiled faintly. I know. There was a pause. It wasn't awkward. It was honest. For the first time in my life, we weren't arguing. We were just two men sitting across from each other, separated by years of misunderstanding. Then he said something I never thought I'd hear. "I was wrong about you." I looked at him and saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Shame mixed with admiration. "You worked hard," he added. "You earned this." I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. Part of me wanted to say everything I had held back all these years. The anger, the pain, the nights I cried, wondering why I wasn't enough. But instead, I did something else. I smiled gently and said, "You should be working with me, Dad. Not against me." The entire table went silent. His hand froze midway to his glass. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. His lips trembled, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then quietly, he whispered, "I'd like that." No one spoke after that. There was nothing more to say. That moment said it all. Forgiveness, growth, and peace. I didn't win by proving him wrong. I won by letting go. Later that night, as I walked to my car, I glanced back at the house. The same lights, the same windows, but something inside had changed. Maybe it was him, maybe it was me, or maybe it was just life finally coming full circle. I looked up at the sky, smiled, and whispered, "Sometimes, the best revenge is showing them you never needed it." That night, when I finally got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the quiet rooms of my apartment, still wearing the same jacket from dinner. and let the silence wrap around me. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't an empty silence. It was peaceful. I sat down on the couch, leaned back, and closed my eyes. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, but it didn't hurt anymore. The words that once cut me now felt distant, like echoes fading away into the past. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who doubted himself, who thought being successful would finally make his father proud. But that night, I realized something I had never understood before. The moment my father said he was wrong wasn't the moment I won. The real victory had happened long before that. In every morning, I woke up and kept trying when no one believed in me. It's strange how life works. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who unknowingly push us toward who we're meant to become. My father's words broke me once, but they also built me. His disbelief gave me a reason to believe in myself. His laughter lit a fire I didn't know I had. And now, standing on the other side of all that pain, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude. I realized that holding on to bitterness only keeps you tied to the past. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pride. And in that moment, sitting in the quiet glow of the city lights outside my window, I knew that forgiving him wasn't for him. It was for me. I took a deep breath and smiled. "You should be working with me, Dad," I had said. It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. Because deep down, I didn't want revenge. I wanted connection. I wanted him to see that we didn't have to be enemies, that success wasn't a wall between us, but a bridge waiting to be crossed. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk by the lake near my building. The sun was rising, painting the sky with soft colors, orange, gold, a hint of blue. The world felt new again. I watched strangers passing by, people heading to work, parents walking their kids to school, joggers with their headphones on, and I thought, everyone's fighting something invisible. Maybe that's why we need stories like mine, not to brag, but to remind others that pain can have a purpose. There's something powerful about being underestimated. It forces you to find strength you didn't know existed. It teaches you patience, humility, and resilience. And when you finally rise, you don't rise with arrogance. You rise with understanding. You realize that the people who laughed at you weren't your enemies. They were lessons. I've learned that success without peace feels empty. You can have everything: money, recognition, respect, but none of it matters if your heart is still heavy. Real success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always capable, even when no one else saw it. As I walked back home, I saw an older man sitting alone on a bench, feeding birds. He looked tired but peaceful. I don't know why, but I thought of my father again. Maybe he was sitting in his chair that morning, drinking coffee, thinking about last night, about the words I said. Maybe he was finally proud, not because I made millions, but because I became someone who didn't let pain turn into hate. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving dinner, the laughter, the shame, the silence that followed me out the door. I used to wish I could erase that moment. Now I wouldn't change a thing, because without that night, I might have never found the strength to build the life I have today. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the people who doubt you don't define your worth. Your persistence does. Keep showing up. Keep building. Keep believing in yourself even when no one else does. Because one day, you'll look back and realize every no Every failure, every painful word was leading you somewhere beautiful. That night, before going to bed, I looked out my window one last time. The city below was quiet, glowing under the soft moonlight. I thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the laughter, the lessons, and I smiled. "Thank you," I whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself. Because in the end, I didn't just build a company, I built myself. And that was worth everything. And if you think this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened to the man whose wife left him while he was dying in the hospital, right before finding out he had inherited $16 million. It's a story about loss, regret, and what real justice looks like when life turns the tables. Click on the video on the left. You won't forget this one.